Greetings, and thank you for tuning in to the teamX final presentation video. This is the tale of our journey with the Wyoming Infrared Observatory's telescope control system. When our team was formed, we didn't really have any direction we wanted to go in particular for our senior design project, so we looked into some of the faculty project ideas and found out that Dr. Gamboa was proposing a project to fix the Wyoming Infrared Observatory's telescope control system. So that's a computer that moves the 30-ton telescope. This would require that we learn about Linux device drivers, and we were up for that because we were all quite familiar with the C programming language already, and we all thought it would be pretty neato to learn about how to make hardware talk to Linux machines. So our first semester was focused on learning about Linux device drivers. But this second semester was where the tire hit the pavement, and we learned how cold and cruel working with 45-year-old hardware really is. Back at the beginning of this semester, we got into contact with the people at Wyro and got our mitts on the equipment that we were going to be hacking. Jordan got the computer and all of its parts set up in his apartment, eating up much of his square footage. This is where we began to run into problem after problem, and for starters, the computer wouldn't boot. It would greet us with a kernel panic. So we were stumped on that for quite some time, but after messing with the boot settings through trial and error, the machine finally booted, and there was much rejoicing. The next problem we ran into, though, would, in a sense, take over our project. So we started messing with the code, and we found out that when we tried to run the program, there was a device that was refusing to open. The hardware wasn't talking to each other. We found ourselves trying to find where in the code the problem was coming from, but eventually we realized that we should just use the Linux system utilities to test if we could manually talk to the devices at all. So, to our astonishment, we were able to get the devices to talk. But then we moved a cable, and it didn't work anymore. So that could only mean one thing: hardware malfunction. You see, this piece of hardware was an ancient micro 488A bus controller that is no longer manufactured. We learned that this type of failure we were experiencing was actually quite common with that device. So there was another one at Wyro that we tried to use, but it was also broken. One of our contacts at Wyro even tried to repair the device, but that didn't work either. These errors would take weeks to move through, because as the winter in Laramie got more and more bleak and cold, it was like our project did as well. And I'm sure that most of us this year experienced something similar. But finally the sun came out, and halfway through April, our friends at Wyro got a hold of a replacement device, an NI-GPIB RS-232. But it turned out that we didn't have the cables required to use this device. Also, the device could only be configured by a piece of software running on a Windows machine through a port that most computers don't have. So we ordered about 10 different cables and adapters, and finally we were able to connect and configure the device. This was about a week ago though, and we're at the end of the journey. So our main goal is to keep the telescope running for years to come, but we barely scratched the surface of the work that will be needed to go into that, replacing only one of the many obsoleted parts at Wyro. I learned from this project, what I truly took away from it was that I think I have a problem with instant gratification, and when something takes or doesn't work right off the bat and takes a long time just to keep failing and failing, it's easy to get discouraged for me. So when we kept running into problem after problem, and we'd send an email to one of the experts at Wyro, and they wouldn't respond right away, and you wait 3 days and they do respond. Well, I'm still sitting there, and it would be maybe 3 or 4 days before I would respond back. And I had a lot of other stuff due week by week, but if we are what we habitually do, then it should be more of a do it to do it right here and right now in the present moment, instead of telling yourself that you're going to do it next week or the week after that, or when school slows down, because school never slows down. Life never slows down. So I'm actually kind of disappointed with the amount of effort and work I put in, but I learned that it's if you know that you're not giving it you're 100%, that you can be doing better, then you're going to end up suffering more than if you just fail constantly at it. Like, I'd rather be failing with trial and error and working on something than not working on it at all and knowing in my heart that I could have done better.
So I learned that old hardware is a lot harder to debug than probably any of the software I've had to debug in my time using computers. I learned that no matter how big your collection of miscellaneous cables and adapters is, it's probably not big enough. You probably need more. um, I learned that Wyro's telescope control system has some really scary code in terms of the practices that some people have used in the past. Learned the basics of Linux device drivers. Learned how to compile the Linux kernel. And I learned that things like time management and teamwork and all of that can't really help in the face of so many variables that you just kind of have to wait for things. And I guess most of all, I learned how to deal with just doing our best, even when it doesn't give us exactly the desired results.
I learned quite a bit about Linux device drivers. The first semester after we got our hands on the hardware and the code base for the Wyro telescope, we were able to start familiarizing ourselves with how Linux device drivers worked and how the code base was working with them um, to run the telescope and everything. I think that we definitely were very optimistic with our timeline, and with a little bit more time, we probably could have gotten a bit more done. But there was just issues with the initial hardware not working, and the spare parts being stuck at the Wyro facility with limited access. Just little things like that. There was some kinks in the shipping on new parts as well. So just very little things that were kind of out of our control that we didn't plan for initially.
So let's see, what did I learn through this senior design project? Well, how do I say this? As the project went on and it became more apparent that there were issues that were simply beyond our control, it did become more difficult for me to really make myself care at all about this project, especially since I already have a problem with procrastinating, especially on group projects, as many people can probably relate to. And also, being online for the entire semester certainly didn't help with any of that either. So, I guess one learning experience was figuring out how to stay focused and motivated, even in the face of a seemingly unwinnable situation that is beyond my control. Doing the things I could do, such as continuing to keep up with and provide feedback on the 3-week videos for all the other different groups, and making sure I regularly attended our group meetings and other similar activities, which I will admit never really seemed like much to me in the grand scheme of things, but they were still important for what we could do. And so there you have it. Although I may not have gained much in the way of technical experience on this project, I was able to learn some good life skills that are just as important with finding and holding a career as really anything else you can get, I think.
If we could give any advice to future teams, it would be not to worry too much about where the project is going, because problems are going to come from every direction imaginable and unimaginable. We're happy that we were able to contribute to our university's observatory, and thank you for watching our final presentation.